Streaming from Oklahoma's own digital studio, this is Thunder Talk with Dean Blevins and John Holcomb.
Game 3 tonight. Thanks for joining us. Dean and John here with you to talk through some Thunder things in a very important Game 3, by the way. Dean, let's just start here. Tied at 1 each. I know we both shared this stat last night that the team, when it's tied at 1 each in the finals, the team that wins Game 3 goes on to win the series 80% of the time, or just north of 80% of the time. That you can't argue with that stat, but this strikes me as having a little bit of a different feel, at least at this stage. How about you?
Well, I think the Thunder could overcome a loss here and come back and win Game 4. I wouldn't want to go beyond that and say they will come back, but it's in their best interest, and it's in the best interest of the heart rate of Thunderland if they were to be able to take care of business tonight. I think this is an intriguing matchup, whether that turns into fruition or not, because it seems like Game 3s, you see more coaching changes, more strategy injected than any other time. For one thing, they have, I think, they have an extra day to prepare. But, you've seen the other teams a couple of times at their place. You know it's going to be a little bit different atmosphere at yours. You can course correct. And that's not so good news for Oklahoma City, because even though Mark Daigneault is about as good as any coach in the league, I feel comfortable in saying that Carlisle is as good as any coach in the league. And so we'll see how he adjusts tonight. But I wouldn't be surprised to see some adjustments. And one of them, no doubt, will be Hallie, score, shoot, because the numbers are unbelievable. I'm sure you've looked them up. When he shoots 15 or 20, and when he scores 20 points or more, it's unbelievable what the numbers are and how much more successful they are when he reaches those points.
Yeah, and he can go on those micro burst type of scoring runs too, which is awfully dangerous. And frankly, he was in the middle of one in the fourth quarter of Game 2, and they just couldn't get over the hump the way they did in Game 1. Here's another stat that I find interesting, but there's some psychology behind this too. This season, these two teams in Game 3s, in their previous 3 series, they've combined for 1 win. I mean, Indiana's 0-3 in Game 3s, Oklahoma City 1-2, but you can't say they've got a real Game 3 problem necessarily, because a couple of times both teams were up 2-0 and the venue changes, and you just expect the road team in a desperate situation to play better, and your level, I mean, we're human, they're human. You might argue that SGA might be only partially human and something even better than human the way he's played so far. But the psychology of it plays a big deal when you look back at the Game 3s, doesn't it?
Yeah, no question. Oklahoma City was in control of the games at Paycom. I mean, what do you have? 48 minutes. You got 96 minutes in the 2 games. I would say that for over 80 minutes of that 96, Oklahoma City was in control. So you hope that tells you something about it. And I tell you what, I know Carlisle was really good, but let's just look at what Oklahoma City did differently in Game 2, and whether it had to do with more focus and intensity or strategy or execution. Whatever happened, they were a better team. And there is some thought out there that they have course corrected and that they're going to be hard to stop right now.
Yeah, I agree on that. And part of what they've done that's been good, I believe, in both of the first 2 games, although people go back to, well, Caruso should have been on Haliburton at the end of Game 1, not Case. Cason Wallace is a really good defender. I know that maybe Caruso gives you an extra inch, but that was you didn't call timeout. You trusted your players. If you're Rick Carlisle, the play happened and the momentum was going toward that anyway. But my point is this. Some people are like, boy, I don't know about starting Cason Wallace. Well, the overall picture of starting him and going smaller overall has been a major success. And part of it has to do with, if you had started Hartenstein instead of Wallace, the matchups and allowing Indiana some early offensive rhythm, you might have been in a little bit of trouble.
Yeah. Yeah. No, completely agree with that. I think the 3-point shot's going to be important tonight. Oklahoma City, like most teams, isn't as good on the road shooting threes, and they can be a little bit hot and cold. Indiana's a much better shooting 3-point team. They have been in the playoffs, and they're playing at home, and they're wanting Haliburton to get up more. And for that matter, Siakam. You realize that those two guys, both stars, no matter what Stephen A. Smith has to say, they're great players, right? But they're both great players, and between them, neither has scored 20 points. And in fact, Haliburton, John, I don't think he's had an offensive rebound, and he's not shot a free throw. That tells you something. I understand he's a pass-first point guard. And he's a little bit different, but in a good way. But still, can't you find your way to the free throw line? And I'll get into that in a minute. The whistle, I think it's going to be really important tonight. But you might respond to some of those thoughts.
Yeah, I will say this. I'll give Chet Holmgren some credit with Game 2 when it comes to Haliburton, because Indiana, just like everybody else in the league, you try to create the mismatches off of the ball screens. You try to get the matchup you want with the guy with the ball in his hands with the best opportunity. And there were some times in Game 2 when they set, and it seemed like, Dean, and maybe you saw it differently, it seemed like they were setting that ball screen higher and higher up the floor. I mean, even that one time when Haliburton stepped back court, he was so high up there. But the thought is, generally speaking, that you get Haliburton off a screen on a good mismatch with a defender and give him more space to get a head full of steam going downhill so he can get to the free throw line. Chet did a really good job on a handful of occasions by playing off of him enough and using his length to keep Haliburton guessing or not allowing him an angle to get around him. And I think that as the series goes on, that is as much of a key as anything else to me, because you're talking about keeping that one guy that you cannot let get going from Indiana. That is all about keeping him in check and forcing him to have to work harder or make decisions. And if you're a player, you don't want to have to be thinking a lot when you're coming off the ball screen and you know you're trying to score. Yes, you have to make a decision, but you don't want to be thinking all the time. It takes away your ability to use your athleticism.
Siakam is another story. I mean, he's been an all-star, and he plays like it at times now. He is in for a bigger game. Now, you can say that, and then you look at those Stallions that OKC lines up defensively, and there's just not a weak spot. I mean, you go 10, 11 deep. It's almost like, guys, you don't get a uniform unless you are an elite defender, because everyone is. So I think it's not going to be a given that he just shows up and the coach told him to shoot a little bit more and he's going to do that and be successful. They have to go execute certain things. But it does concern me tonight that neither has been good offensively, and they won the one game. And then so you come into this game, and so Siakam, what do you see from him? And do you see my logic there that it could easily be that those guys could combined post another 10 to 15 total points?
Yeah, if Indiana doesn't get more production and more consistently aggressive attacking from both of those guys in the offensive end, I don't think there's any way the Pacers can win the series. I mean, they have to be more of that mindset. So I'll ask you this question. We've already talked about Chet on Haliburton in Game 2 and how well he did in the stretch where Oklahoma City separated and built the lead. I think, could be wrong, but tell me what you think. I think Chet actually may be a better defender on Haliburton, unless Haliburton's just going to pull up and make 28-foot threes all night long. He might be a better defender overall on Haliburton when he gets switched off on him than he would be trying to play Siakam heads up a lot more. What do you think?
I think that's the way the staff feels in Oklahoma City as well. So what do you do with Siakam? I mean, J-Dub gives up a little bit to him. Other reserves, I'm thinking Wiggs and some of the others, they give up a little to him. How do you see Oklahoma City defending him, if any, differently?
I think if I remember correctly in game 2 some, and maybe in game 1, that when Caruso's been in, he's that
I
one guy
forgot
who can,
that guy.
yeah,
I
yeah.
forgot that guy.
Yeah.
He does get a uniform because he's a pretty good defender.
and he's he's whether he started out a possession guarding Siakam or ended up on him, he's the one guy that understands how the whole, when bigger guys are trying to pull you down in the low post. I mean, more often than not, Caruso is fronting that, so he's not giving up so much space, and all of a sudden Siakam could just turn and shoot over the top of him. But he's done a really good job on him, and I think that's the answer for the Thunder continuing to go forward here. Because then how did the Pacers try to counter the other night? Was it the third quarter of game 2 when they started going inside to Miles Turner, who loves to just stand out on the perimeter and shoot threes? He's a really good three-point shooter. But they had success in about 3 or 4 possessions in a row getting the ball where Turner is cleared out, and they just let him operate inside because he had a size advantage. I can't remember if that was Williams or who was on him, but it wasn't one of the bigs. And then they pulled him out of the game, which I thought was curious at the time, but it may have been that Carlisle saw that Turner was, maybe needing a bit of a breather. But that was the one time in game 2 where I saw them really have success doing something multiple times in a row, or 4 out of 5 possessions. So that's how the Pacers countered. Well, what would you rather have? Would you rather have Miles Turner trying to beat you in the low post, or let Siakam just do anything anywhere? I think you'd say, okay, Turner, beat us.
Absolutely. Yeah, no question. A couple of thoughts off of that after saying that I can't believe that Carlisle didn't catch any more grief from throwing up the white flag with 4 minutes to go. I mean, what do you have to lose? You got nothing to lose, and your team has shown that it's capable of coming back. But a couple of other thoughts playing off of that. One, we'll get back to the whistle, but the other is, how about the battle between the role players with the series changing to Indianapolis? Because role players historically are known to play better at home than the visitors.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And so it becomes, Aaron Nesmith has had a moment or two so far, and he can just go ballistic making threes. You've got to guard against that. I mean, Mathurin has played good defense on Shai, but he gives up a little too much size that Shai can make shots over him. But Mathurin's also not shown what he can do on the offensive end of the floor too. Those two guys, and Nembhard was really kind of he might be the biggest X factor of them all as far as I'm concerned for the Pacers. Tremendous finish to game 1. Was kind of MIA in game 2, and that was surprising to me. Was it you?
Yeah, it was, because he was so effective in that first game. Now, how much did Oklahoma City have to do with that? Probably quite a bit. I imagine that the little bump that the SGA got from Nesmith didn't set well, and we know what SGA did in that second game. I want to throw a couple of numbers at you, getting back to that whistle, because if you don't know what the whistle means, it means the refs can screw you occasionally. And if you're a Los Angeles Laker fan, you should know that you go into the game with probably a 6-point advantage, right? At least that's the way
Yes.
I look at it. And you can extrapolate that into your college football teams that you like or dislike, and the same thing kind of holds true. Here are the facts. A lot of the fans, media, and some of the comments from within the team were crying about Oklahoma City being allowed to play more physical. That's the brand they play, and that's what we've seen throughout the playoffs. But they do have a point. But that's been the concern. Indiana has been called for 8 more fouls in the 2 games. Oklahoma City has made 10 more free throws, and they've taken 10 more free throws, and they have made 15 more. So the numbers, they aren't huge, but they do all slide toward Indiana. And I'm just concerned that tonight the league wants its ratings up as big as it can be. And I don't know if there's any truth to any of that, John, that they ever influence the way an official calls a game. But you just know the energy in the crowd and the way things will go, that you're not going to get the whistle as much as you did back at home.
Great points. These officials, as has been documented by others in the digital space, they're all crew chiefs. Okay, it's not like you're pulling the worst of the bunch out here. And what do they typically do? They typically don't call a lot of touch fouls when you get to this point. And you can say, all right, well, they're letting them play more physically this season than maybe in past seasons, or maybe it's been trending this way. And you can give the Thunder credit for seeing that trend, just the way they saw the trend of how teams were going to try to play the game. And so you assemble what you're doing with that in mind. You're trying to stay ahead of the curve. It's like, I mean, I would say this, if I was really active in the stock market, Dean, I would probably want Sam Presti and Mark Daigneault to be my money managers, because they seem to be ahead of things a little bit, at least at this stage. So, yes, now, when you mix into that what you're talking about with the role players usually playing better at home, and there's not the sense of desperation with Indiana, but it's a sense of we've got to reestablish ourselves. All of that can translate into playing more physically, more physical brand, and getting to the basket. But let's look at, if you want to talk about the fouls and people want to say, well, Oklahoma City's getting the benefit of the whistle, somehow it takes until about 2 or 3 minutes into the conversation before you kind of realize, well, you know what? Shai does drive to the basket an awful lot. You're going to draw more contact. How has Indiana really been built? They love to run. They love to get out on fast breaks and try to attack the basket before a defense is set. But it is much more drive and kick outside of Siakam than it is drive and try to get all the way to the rim. Let me go back to Turner. Turner's a three-point shooter.
Yeah.
Nesmith, three-point shooter. Yeah. Haliburton, he's not the most physical guy going to the basket. So you're not going to get as many fouls called if you're going to play that way.
Well, and SGA is going to continue to play the way he is. I doubt he gets as many calls, but I quite frankly have felt that they've gotten away with murder against him.
Yeah.
And it's been that way sort of throughout the playoffs, but certainly in this one, and by virtue of the fact that you haven't even seen Haliburton get to the free throw line, and they're not disputing a bunch of bad calls on him. It's just that he hasn't played that way. So he hasn't even gotten to the free throw line. So it's hard to give them any mercy there. One number that I've looked at that meant a little something to me. Indy has got to take advantage when SGA sits. Oklahoma City has been 8 points better with SGA out there. And that might be a normal thing, but I think that's something that Indiana has talked about, and they're going to look to take more advantage of. The problem is Oklahoma City is there's a reason they have been favored in every playoff game. There's a reason they won the West, the mighty West, by 16 games over the second place team. They're good and they're deep. So, you know, that's Indiana's biggest problem, isn't it?
Yes, it is. If you're looking for those things and you're watching us and you're saying, okay, well, when does SGA sit? Typically, what you really want to keep an eye on, start of the second quarter and start of the fourth quarter. Because he historically sits, well, Dean, what, about first 3.5 minutes maybe of those quarters is kind of what I've come up with. So that's where Indiana, you might expect them, you wouldn't expect Mark Daigneault to change the substitution patterns that much, not with the way you've dominated almost all of both games. And don't forget that I think SGA came back in a little bit later into the fourth quarter than normal. At least it felt that way. I could be wrong about that, but don't forget that he wasn't on the floor in game one when you opened the fourth quarter with that big flurry to go up 15. there were just some
Yeah.
other things that the Thunder didn't take care of.
Yeah.
All right, final thought. What do you think is going to happen tonight?
Well, I think it's going to be a tough win for Oklahoma City, but I think they're just too good, and I think they will. I think they will find a way to win this game. Rebounding, I think they learned their lesson in that first game. We haven't touched on that, but they did a great job in game 2, and I would expect them. Do you remember just how forceful and how aggressive and how aware Chet, for example, was anytime the ball was suspended in the air, and in this case, up a shot that's missed. I mean, they were just very alert and aware, and I think they will carry that over. So I think that will be a big factor in this game, and I do think it will be close. But I think that even though Indiana likes to say they problem solve very well, that's the new cliche because Oklahoma City has talked about that all season long. Oklahoma City is magnificent at problem solving. So I think you throw that into the equation, and I like the Thunder tonight, but not covering that 5.5 point spread.
Yeah, I see a game finishing up in the 110s, something like that. I think maybe Thunder 117, 114. It may come down to a possession where Indiana has a chance to tie it, and maybe the shot doesn't go in this time. That is with this caveat that Jalen Williams and Chet Holmgren play like they did in game 2 and not the way they did in game 1. All right, Dean, thanks, and thanks to everyone for watching.
Yeah, you got it.
We'll see you next time.
Thank you for watching this Oklahoma Zone digital studio stream. Stay with News on 6 online and on television anytime for the latest news, weather, and sports.